Hey, it's Elizabeth D'Alto, and this is the Untame the Wild Soul podcast. From body image, sex, spirituality, money and relationships, to motherhood, creativity, business, communication, and desire, Untame the Wild Soul is the place to come for real stories and powerful advice to help you reclaim and redefine womanhood in the 21st century. What's up, wild ones? Welcome to episode number 205 of the Untame the Wild Soul podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth D'Alto. And I'm really pumped to let you know this is our last podcast interview in the month of October. And if you're listening in real time, coming up in a couple of weeks in November, I'm going to be dedicating 3 full weeks to helping you once again unconsume yourself. Last year, I did a free Unconsume Yourself training. It was 4 weeks long. This year, I have translated that training into a 5-day challenge and some follow-up workshops that I'm super excited to share with you. As well, I have built out, deepened, and expanded that training into a live course that will be starting in the month of December for those who might be interested in that. So keep your eyes and ears open for when all of that starts. And now for today's episode, we are getting into astrology with my friend Jenn Racioppi. There's a few things I reference on the show fairly often that I've been wanting to get guests on to take us a bit deeper with for those who are interested, and astrology is one of those topics. Today's guest, Jenn Racioppi, is one of my favorite astrologers to follow for daily doses of what's going on in the cosmos, how it may be affecting us personally, and how we can work with these energies. During the interview, we look at the skeptic question, and Jenn takes that thing head on. I love the way she did that for those who aren't sure whether or not they resonate with astrology. She also shared the personal health challenges that originally led her into the study and practice of astrology when she was 19 years old, and she defined the significance of 3 basic aspects of astrology: the sun sign, the moon sign, and the rising sign. Aside from signs and planets, she talked about following the moon cycle and how to use it as a manifestation tool through understanding the different qualities and potentials of each phase. This is a fun and informative interview for those of you interested in these topics, and she also loaded us up with resources if you want to take your study deeper. So the show notes page, where you can find links to all the books and all the teachers she mentioned, is at untameyourself.com/episode-205. And now let's get into the show. I'm so pumped to have a conversation about astrology today, people listening or watching. Astrology is something that I started geeking out on, I don't know, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. And just like all the other, I kind of lump astrology in with like personality tests. So like Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, Human Design, Colby Indicator, all these things. I am such a fan of anything that can help us better understand ourselves and how we function, and to also just see and highlight how different we are from everybody else, so that we could like all give each other a bit more leeway when we're just clashing or when we're trying to get along. So Jennifer Racioppi is someone who, this is what she does. You're an astrologer. That would be your title, right?
You got it.
It's so great. So we're going to take a deep dive today, but Jenn, the question I ask all of our women, so it doesn't matter what you do, what do you love about being a woman?
Oh, it's such a juicy question. What do I love about being a woman? The ability to change my mind. But no, in all honesty, the flexibility, the fluidity, the cyclical living, the understanding that my breath and my body is a vehicle for my intuition, for my sensual expression, and really just the freedom of being a woman today, right? Like being a woman now, it just comes if you choose, if you step into it, is such an expansive experience of, we can own property, we can run businesses, we can have credit, we're the leaders of our family in many ways. And this is rare. We're just in an interesting time where we're able to do all that. Certainly my mom's generation didn't have as much freedom of expression as we do now. So I just think it's a really cool moment in history.
Yeah, amazing. So how did you get into astrology? I love people's origin stories.
Yeah, so I did not set out to be an astrologer. This wasn't even as it became very clear that I was a very talented astrologer. It wasn't even something I was willing to pursue professionally. My story with astrology begins about 20 years ago. I was a teenager in a body that I hated, and I was a teenager in a body that wasn't working well. I was a teenager with a body with a lot of problems, specifically hormonal problems. And, it was a big part of my life. I had really painful periods. I had periods that were oppressive. And I would go to the doctor again and again and again, over and over and over again, like so many times, to ask what was wrong with me. And they would just put me on a pill, like a version of the birth control pill, a version of an antidepressant, and tell me that I was a normal teenage girl with very normal, irregular hormonal patterns and rhythms, and they'd send me on my way. And about 6 weeks after I graduated high school, I had a tumor the size of a bowling ball rupture in my left ovary, which prompted me to...
that doesn't even, in my brain, that doesn't even make sense to me. How is there even space for a tumor that big?
Yeah, I was 95 pounds. I'm 5 feet tall. And it was protruding from my left ovary for some time. And I had just thought I got fat, like I was an athlete. I skipped spring track that year. I was hanging out at the beach with my friends. I was eating whatever. And I just thought this is what it felt like to gain weight.
Oh, wow.
And I had been to the doctor quite a bit to ask, and they would just dismiss it. Ovarian cancer is one of the hardest cancers to detect. It just is. There's no, especially in the late 90s, there weren't advanced tests for it. So we didn't know that anything was happening there until the pain had gotten so bad because the tumor ruptured, pressed into my lungs. I couldn't breathe, fell to the floor, called 911. And after hours in the emergency room where they're like, is there any chance you could be pregnant? Would you have food poisoning? Like, they didn't know what was going on. They finally did enough, when you look inside the body, whatever those scans are, and they're like, oh no, there's something in there that needs to come out. So I had emergency surgery. I had an ovary, the tumor, and a fallopian tube removed. I had a path report come back, stage 1 ovarian cancer, which was then highly studied. And they were like, well, we're not sure. This is borderline. We're going to watch you. They sent me on my way to college. It was my freshman year of college. And I was just really in a raw state, as one could imagine. And 1 year later, they detected that I had a really aggressive endometrial cancer, which then resulted in a radical hysterectomy. And because I had already had this really borderline ovarian cancer situation, they just highly suggested removing the other ovary because ovarian cancer is so dang hard to detect. And so at the ripe age of 19, and it was 1998, I launched into sudden overnight menopause. So I didn't have a hormonal rhythm, and that just sent me on a path of really not knowing who I was, really not knowing how to respond to life. I had post-traumatic stress, lots of panic attacks. And I just went on a journey. So part of my journey was that I took off. I moved from the East Coast to California, dropped out of college, took a leave of absence, and started studying everything and anything under the sun that could potentially make me feel better. One thing was to start to follow lunar cycles to replace my hormonal rhythm. So I started living my life in sync with the phases of the moon religiously. And that was something that offered me two real solid things. One, I started having a rhythm again, meaning a cycle of creation within myself. And two, it also taught me how to manifest like a badass, because part of my healing journey was I emancipated myself from my family, because my family's great. They're wonderful. I love them. We've done a lot of healing, but at the time there were some abusive patterns and I needed to take ownership of my life. And that meant financial sovereignty. So by learning how to live in sync with the phases of the moon, I learned how to provide for myself at a really young age while hailing from cancer, putting myself through college, and launching myself into the world as an adult. And over time of having lived really religiously in sync with the phases of the moon, I started to live really religiously in sync with the phases of the planet. And almost like a blind person learns to read Braille, I just started living cyclical patterns with the cosmos. And then obviously that opened up pathways for me to be really open and understanding. And I had a couple of mentors come in my life. The one most notable was in 2008, and she really took me under her wing. And she's like, this is what it means to be a professional astrologer. This is how you do it. And I just started doing it for fun. And people would come to me and I would help them with business plans and marriage problems and predicting births, whatever. And then the influx of people just became so strong for so long that my business just became this. It morphed. It was just where my zone of genius was and where my greatest point of impact is. And now I marry it with a lot of evidence-based science because I've studied out the wazoo and I do my thing.
I love this. So there's so many things we need to unpack. First of all, say more about marrying it with evidence-based science. So, and actually before we got on, I had checked in with you. I'm like, I want to ask you about pushback you get. So let's do this first. Let's do the skeptic question first. I know, and because I have friends who are very like, astrology, that's a load of bullshit. Or actually, recently, there was an exchange online between an astrologer, I'm sure you know, and a leader in the self-help industry, male, who I'm sure you also know, where he basically on her own Facebook wall was like, this is confirmation bias. Like, this is bullshit, basically. And they had this exchange, and he was just like mansplaining all over the place, which I took a screenshot of the definition of mansplain, and I was like, hey, so-and-so, are you familiar with this term? Because you're killing it right now. I couldn't help myself. So anyway.
Case in point, but I love being a woman.
Then he tried to dismiss me, and then I came out with something else. It didn't matter, but like, I'm just over mansplaining as a thing. Anyway, how do you answer people who are like, it's a pseudoscience, or this isn't, whatever?
Well, the truth of the matter is it is a pseudoscience. As I was saying, there isn't like a ton of evidence-based research on astrology. I'm a girl who lives in PubMed, so I'm constantly researching, looking for latest science. I geek out on this stuff, particularly from a women's health perspective. So I've researched everything under the sun in terms of how are lunar cycles impacting our menstrual cycles, and has this really been researched? And the truth of the matter is, in modern day, it hasn't. There haven't been well-funded studies on this that have proved definitively clear that astrology is indeed a true, actual science. However, when we look at history and we look at how astrology has been used, certainly throughout the course of the Western civilization, it's always had a place up until the Age of Enlightenment, and that's when the church really came into power. And it got repressed, suppressed, depressed. If you go to a place like Florence, you're going to find that a lot of the history, particularly the Renaissance history, is really influenced by astrology. Even the Renaissance art, like Birth of Venus, there's so many famous pieces of art that really reference astrology. Then it, got, like so many things, got pushed into the shadows when a true patriarchy rose. So I answered the question by saying, you're correct. It's not an evidence-based science. And if we look to history, we'll see how this informs us, informs our history, informs medical practices throughout the ages. But more importantly, let's try it. Give me your birth, your date, your time, and I'm going to tell you some stuff that's going to blow your mind that I've never known before. Or, start tracking these phases and cycles for yourself and start to see, like, is this true? Before you just go and diss something so hardcore, have an open mind and make sure you know what you're talking about. Because if you're just prejudiced and you just don't like it and it doesn't make sense, and you know too many people who ask you like what your sign is, like people from Jersey ask what your exit is, and you just get turned off immediately, name that for yourself, because you're just not tolerant to something, right? And if you're truly curious, give it a try. And also, I'm talking really fast. Let me just slow down. The most important thing to do is understand that you are not your sun sign alone. Most people just know their sun sign, and some people don't even know their sun sign because they think that if they're born on the 21st, that they're automatically a Taurus, when indeed they're the last degree of Aries. So it just never made sense for them. So know what you're talking about. Understand that astrology is so nuanced, right? You are not just your sun sign. You're your moon sign. You're your rising sign. You have a Mars, you have a Mercury, you have a Venus, and it's all about the configuration of the planets. So even if you're a Virgo and you just don't identify with being a Virgo, it doesn't mean astrology is wrong. It just means that your knowledge of how you're relating to it might be superficial.
Yeah. I love that. And this is so true. So I pretty much grew up just see like the horoscopes in the paper. And I am a Virgo, actually. And so I'd see the things, and it would always talk about being a perfectionist. And I'm like, I super don't resonate with that. I've always been a done is better than a perfect type of person. And then, as I did get into the more nuances of astrology, even just like the deeper archetypes, like Virgin, Virgo, that actually is more means like a woman unto herself. In some traditions, it's the high priestess. And like these things make way more sense to me. So I love that call. And even not in the context of astrology, but any new concept, any body of work, anything where you have any curiosity that there might be something there for you, do some research, try it out.
Yeah.
Go deeper than like just what's in the mainstream. So let's start. If someone is listening and they're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I was a skeptic, but now I'm willing to try it out. Where do you recommend people start if they're going to go down the rabbit hole?
I mean, I think that to get a really good astrology session, you can do so for anywhere between 150 and 300 and some odd dollars, right? So we're not talking about a high end investment. I understand that that's a lot of money for a lot of people, and it's kind of doable. So you can find a really good astrologer in the range of something that is of high impact personal development investment at not an extremely high risk. So if you can and you're interested, check out an astrologer. That's always the best thing to do, is just go see an astrologer. Next best things to do are to go to sites like astro.com, where you can get your own chart for free and start to you may not understand it, but it breaks it out and tells you oh, your sun's in this or your Mercury's that, and just hit up Google. Really, there's so many wonderful sites on Google that, that Google can direct you to, that are going to start to give you information on what it means to have a moon in Aries, what it means to have a sun in Virgo, what it means to have a Mars in whatever. Other great things to do are to check out other people's astrology blogs. So Susan Miller, super reputable. She does horoscopes every month. Just read it, see if it resonates, see if it clicks for you, and so forth. The other thing I always say to people who are starting out on a path that involves some sort of intuitive practice is give yourself permission to say maybe $30 in your pocket and go to a bookstore and just ask for whatever book is meant to be for you, to you be called to it, and just see where you're led to. So much of my knowledge has developed out of synchronicity. I was in the right place at the right time to hear the right message by the right person or read the right book. And I know that sounds pretty woo-woo for people out there who are on a more linear path. And if you're listening to the show, I think you get it.
Yeah, we talk about synchronicity all the time. We love that.
Yeah.
Do you have any favorite books? So I'm all about go to the bookstore with $30 in your pocket, but some people are like, but give me your recommendation. I know my women.
I love everything by Linda Goodman, Jan Spiller. One of my dear good friends, Rebecca Gordon, just put out a book, Your Body and the Stars. I think that's what it's called. And she's an amazing astrologer, and that's for health and astrology. Mark Hudson is a wonderful astrologer. He does some shows. He used to be on Hay House Radio. I don't know where he's at right now, but he has a site called 12 House, and he does a lot of astrology updates. And he also wrote a book on sun signs. Those are the ones that jump out to me. My very first astrology book was the birthday book.
Mm-hmm.
You go and you
yep.
And you read about that just blew my mind. I'm like, how do they know that about me? What is this? So those are some oldies but goodies. I'm just trying to think if anything jumps out at me. Jan Spiller is pretty much my go-to. One of my astrology mentors, Deborah Silverman, wrote a book called The Missing Element. And that's a really easy way to just understand some basic concepts in astrology, earth, air, fire, and water, and to get some really basic beginner language down.
Cool. And would it be considered a lineage, or I know there's different types of astrology. What type of astrology do you read?
Western esoteric, which is, it just, and I would just say it's typically very Western astrology, which is different than Vedic astrology. Vedic astrology is an astrology that comes out of India, comes out of the Vedas. It's just reads the zodiac in a different way. Western astrology is very influenced by Western philosophers, and it looks at the rising sign. It just has a different house positions. But in Western esoteric astrology, the main distinction that I use for myself is that the rising sign isn't so much the mask you wear, but it's what you're rising to. It's what you're becoming. It's known as your ascendant. So I see it more as part of your soul's path. Many astrologers will argue that you can't see the soul in astrology chart because you don't know what someone's going to do with that chart until they're born into it. And then other astrologers will argue that, no, you can really see soul's purpose. So it's an interesting dance. I'm somewhere in between, where I really do think that that we have to take into consideration our choices, our behaviors, and actions, which brings me to another book that's amazing for astrology, which is by Robert Ohado, Transforming Your Fate into Destiny. It's an oldie but a goodie. He worked a lot with Carolyn Mace and her school, which is a medical intuition development school. And then he went out on his own after that and developed quite a career as an astrologer. And his book, Transforming Your Fate into Destiny, is one of the books that speaks the most to how I use astrology, which is truly from a humanistic perspective, meaning that we're fated to certain things. Like I was fated maybe to have cancer at a young age because I was born into a certain lineage, a certain biology, a certain time, had certain traumatic events that became my biology in ways. But my destiny was that I chose to not die, right? I could have died. I chose to be courageous and find a healing path. I could have not, I chose to rise to the occasion of my life, and I transformed my destiny in the process of accepting and working with my fate. So I think his work's fantastic. He does archetypal astrology, which is his own flavor. I've studied with him. I've done a formal certification through him as well. But he's really, 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 really rock solid at understanding psyche and like bringing depth psychology into astrology. And again, Deborah Silverman, one of my other mentors, she's amazing. And she does this as a psychotherapist and has brought astrology into her psychotherapy work. So it's just a really quick way to move through blocks.
Oh, I love that.
Those are the types of astrologers I'm interested in. Less about predictive work, more about like, how do I get to know myself and overcome my issues so I can be a more full expression of my talents.
Yeah, I agree. And this is actually why I wanted to have someone come on the show and just give us the basics, give us some threads to pull, some books, some resources and things, because that is what astrology has really done for me. Understanding myself so much deeper, seeing where my limitations are. So, and actually just over this past weekend, I was with a friend. And so I'm going to ask you to describe just some of the basic aspects, right? Like sun, moon, rising. And then, but what I was just going to share is I have a north node in Gemini and a south node in Sagittarius. And a friend was saying how like the south node, just like check out what your south node is in, because those will be like your defaults. It's almost like you need to know what are like the downfalls of like that archetype so that you can see when it's coming up for you, because that's actually keeping you from ascending to like where you're meant to go. And I'm like, oh, that's super useful. And so again, I'm a huge fan of astrology. People listening, if you're not even remotely curious, you've probably already pressed stop on the interview, but just being able to see like some nitty gritty things about ourselves instead of some of these more sweeping, like I love Myers-Briggs. That was kind of like my first taste into typologies, but it's certainly not intricate enough. And so the danger is putting yourself in boxes. Whereas something like astrology, I feel like is so nuanced. The danger is like getting way too caught up in the details and like almost paralyzed because there's so much to learn and know. But I'd rather have too much information than not enough and see the flexibility within the archetypes and like the range, which I think is cool. So let's rewind and go in your perspective. And again, just reminding people, if for some reason this doesn't resonate, then go check out another kind of astrology or astrologer. But sun sign, what is that?
Yeah. So I just want to piggyback off a couple things you said, and then I'll answer that quite concretely. Cool. That Vedic astrology is going to be a very direct type of astrology where you're going to say like, on this day, you're going to meet your man. On that day, oh, don't get married then. On this day, it's very exact, right? Yeah. Where a Western astrologer who comes from a humanistic perspective, which is what I do, is more going to look at the roadblocks in your life and how you can evolve them. And certainly we'll get more pinpoint and direct. But also on the topic of North Node and South Node, as Liz just brought up, they're really important topics. The work of Jan Spiller is actually superb on that as well. So, so just to further the resource question. And then, okay, so a sun sign. What is a sun sign? So the moment we take our first breath, in astrology, we take a leap of faith. We believe as above, so below, and that we're all connected, right? And the moment that we take in a first breath, we're breathing in life. We're breathing in the universe. We're breathing in the cosmos. So at that moment, the placement of the sun, where the sun is in the sky, represents some of your core characteristics as a human being. So the sun is our life force. It's our vitality. Everything on the planet is here because of the sun, right? The photosynthetic properties, our ability to receive light, we need the sun. So therefore, where the sun was the moment we took our first breath gives us an archetype or a persona of what we're coming in with. So sun sign, identity, And many people will attribute that with the masculine quality of how we take action in the world, what we're all about. It's like our core identity, right? And then we counterbalance that with things like, okay, so I'm a Gemini sun, but I have a Virgo moon. It's totally different qualities, Gemini and Virgo, completely different. So what's a moon sign? Is that okay for me to just start rambling off? Okay.
Just go.
So a moon sign represents our subconscious needs, our subconscious desires, our emotional temperament, what we need to feel emotionally satiated, and how we express our softer side, like our yin side or our feminine side, depending on how people relate to gender terminology, right? So if the sun is our, like really our modus operandi, the moon is like, and then how do we meet our emotional inner world? So me as a Gemini, I'm pretty social, I'm pretty communicative, but as a Virgo moon, dude, I need alone time. I need places to come back to. I can't have too much socializing. Like I'm pretty much introvert, extrovert, but tend way more towards the introverted side for personal recovery. And a Virgo moon means I need health, I need structure, I need systems. I'm like pretty analytical, highly descriptive, to the point. It took me a long time to get behind of astrology as a career because of all the questions you brought up. And until I did 1,000 charts, I had my own reservations. But that's the qualities of my Virgo moon. So my moon sign is everyone's moon sign. Your moon is your emotional temperament, it's your emotional need. And when we look at where the moon was relative to the sun the moment you took your first breath. So my sun was in Gemini, the moon was in Virgo. I was born on a waxing quarter square, which means that the sun and the moon weren't getting along. This is a little bit more advanced, so I'll just keep it short. But they weren't getting along. So in many ways, I was born into a marriage, my parents, where I was born in the middle of a fight. I was born in the middle of a war. And that was my childhood. And there was tug of war. I was thrown in the middle. I had to fight for my own identity. I was the second child out of 3, total middle child syndrome. And this, you can see it concretely in my chart, right? Like how that argument, I was born in the middle, was part of my illness, my resurrection, who I am today, and learning how to reconcile those different parts of myself was part of my healing journey. Okay, I can go get treated for cancer. You can cut the cancer out of me, but you can't resolve the underlying developmental episodes that created the cancer in the first place. But astrology gives you a look at that, right?
Right.
So when you know your sun, your moon, you can start to understand who you are in front of a camera. When all of the doors are closed, who are you really? Who are your secret selves? Who are your shadows? And knowing your moon sign helps you understand what you need to feel emotionally satiated. Your rising sign, so it's pretty straightforward. The sun is where the sun was the moment you took your first breath. The moon is where the moon was the moment you took your first breath. You get those signs, you get the position relative, like what does it mean to have both of these signs? Do they get along? Do they not get along? How does that contribute to how you go through life? And then look at your rising sign. The rising sign was the constellation that was rising on the eastern horizon the moment you took your first breath relative to where you were born. So that's why exact times are so important in astrology, because the exact time tells us what degree your rising sign was at. And that matters because it makes up all the other houses in the chart. So in the Western astrology chart, there's 12 houses. Each house represents something different. First house cusp is your rising sign. And that rising sign tells us, from my perspective, what are you rising to? Who are you becoming? Part of your mission this lifetime. And then also gives us the breakdown of how the other houses play out. And then you want to look for an understanding of how these 3 main points, your sun, moon, and rising, interact with one another. It's going to tell you what house your sun signs in, what house your moon signs in, and what the reconciliation is in order to walk around as an integrated, cohesive human, given that there's so many conflicting aspects, or maybe not. Most people there are. Some people are just born with like everything's in harmony, which is interesting in and of itself, because that can become a challenge when everything's a little too easy, maybe not enough friction for your growth. Maybe not, maybe you're so super solid, but a lot of people have conflicting aspects of self that they need to reconcile, which is why humans are so dang complicated, right?
Yeah.
We're just a lot of things all at once.
Okay, this is great. I love it. And I know for people, so I'm from the East Coast, Jen's from the East Coast. I'm reminded of right now how much effort I've had to put into speaking slower. I know she's talking quickly. And so, two things. You're probably going to want to re listen to this, but also, I'm pretty sure in whatever player you have, you can actually slow it down if you need to. I know, like, when I met people not from the East Coast, they'd be like, I'm sorry, what did you just say? So, I'm sure for some of our listeners, they're like, I need this chick to slow down a little bit, but I think you're fine. And I'm like totally tracking with you. So, we're going to keep going. The moon cycles, then let's talk about this because we've talked about them. We've had Lisa Lister on the show, Rebecca Campbell, Kate Northrup. We've had many people refer to the moon, and I'm specifically curious in something you mentioned earlier of how following the moon has allowed you to become a badass manifester. How does that relate or connect?
Yeah. So the moon has multiple cycles, and the moon, as we know, goes through a pattern of death and rebirth every month, meaning that the moon is new every month, the moon is full every month, the moon waxes every month, and the moon wanes every month. And that cycle of the moon is a cycle of creation if you tune into it, particularly for women who don't cycle, for women who are in perimenopausal years, and for women with this deep spiritual thirst to see how they can co-create with the universe. If you start to pay attention to moon cycles, there's so much you can learn. So how do you manifest with the phases of the moon? It's by getting really clear with intentions and starting to see the moon as a force of creation in and of itself. So when I first started, I looked at this really concretely. Like, the new moon was the time to set intentions. During a waxing moon, you did all of your positive visualizations, your manifestation techniques, anything that was going to help you imagine, see, feel, become in alignment with it. It's like when the law of attraction stuff would work really well. And then as the moon waxed to full, it's a time of culmination, a time when things would be right. Maybe your intention would already have manifested. I've done that a lot. Got something done really quick. Didn't take much time at all for something to come into being. I was really ready to have it. Other times, maybe not so much. So the moon becomes full, and it's a time of illumination, right? Because let's just talk about what a new moon is. The sun and the moon align at the same degree in the sky. We just had a total solar eclipse, and people were really excited because the sun, the moon, and the earth aligned in a way, particularly in the US, where this became visible. But the sun and the moon align every single month at the same degree, whether we see it or not, right? It's kind of funny. Like, we have to see it to believe it.
You're like, this actually happens all the time.
And we have eclipses every 6 months regularly throughout the year. It's just rare that they're total. Well, it's not even that rare that they're total. It's rare that it's total and viewable from the US, for sure. That's rare. But every month, the sun and the moon meet up at the same degree. And so if we take the moon that represents subconscious needs, subconscious desires, and the sun that represents life force energy, and we combine them in 1 degree in the sky, it's like fertility, right? Like, it's very concentrated potency. The sky is dark. You can't see the moon at the time of the new moon. And I liken that to like a blank canvas. What are you going to paint? It's totally fresh. And depending on the sign and the position that moon falls in your chart, there are particular things that open up to you at that point. So, New Moon Wishes by Jan Spiller is an oldie but goodie. If you want to start working with new moon intentions and you just need like a quick book, that's going to get that there for you. So New Moon Intentions is a wonderful book for you to start to understand what sorts of seeds you should be planting at the various new moons throughout the year. Because a new moon in Aries is very different than a new moon in Sagittarius. They all have different flavors and outfits, if you will, right? They have the same quality that they're beginnings, but they have different potentials based on the sign that they're in. So I definitely recommend New Moon Wishes if you're interested in this work. It's definitely an oldie and definitely a goodie. And then from there, the sun and the moon do their dance where the moon starts to separate from the sun and gain light from the sun and reflect it back to earth. That's why within a few days of the new moon, you start to see that crescent moon. So we go into a waxing crescent, then we go into a waxing square, then we go into a waxing gibbous phase, and we go into a full moon. And those 2 weeks between the new moon and the full moon is a time of gain, right? The moon is gaining light from the sun. Well, the moon rules our oceans. The moon rules our tides. The moon is part of why we have gravity. The moon rules emotional temperament, whether we like to see it or whether we believe it or not. And so as the moon's gaining light from the sun, thus becoming more visible, its influence on the earth is a waxing influence. So if you are consciously growing something in your life, it's a beautiful time to build up the momentum. Gardeners use this. Biodynamic farming uses this. Fishermen use this. People have been tracking the phases of the moon to harvest for a very long time. This is not new. But those of us who are interested in manifesting techniques, it's still not new. You know, this has been going on for a long time too, but maybe it's new to us now. So then the moon waxes into full. A full moon is a sense of illumination, and really it's a sense of power. Full moons are wonderful times to stand outside in the full moonlight, to let the pituitary glands receive the light of the moon. It does some healing regularities to our hormonal system. You know, it can regulate things and be quite healing. And it can also illuminate where we're at in our lives. You know, what's working, what's not working, what do we need to let go of? Because immediately after the sun and the moon oppose one another, so now the moon's receiving all of the light of the sun, reflecting it back to us on Earth, it starts to do this dance from the sun where it begins to wane. So it's moving incrementally away from the sun, and it's going into the waning gibbous phase, the waning quarter phase, the waning crescent phase, all the way back to the new phase. And during the waning cycle, it's really powerful to let go of things. So this is like, how do you let go? What's blocking you? You know, to consciously let go of what's holding you back while the moon's waning, so that by the time you come to the new moon, you've actually done a lot of work, right? You developed a vision, you worked on behalf of obtaining that vision, you've allowed the cycles of nature to illuminate where you are in your life. Perhaps you've received, and then you let go of blocks to becoming your best and better self, and you can start the cycle over again. So like clockwork, we have new moons all the time, very regularly, just shy of a month. You'll have a new moon, and same thing with the full moon. And if you just learn to even tune into those two things, experiment. I say chart your success. Look at what's happening in your life and see if it's influencing you, and if this is a powerful tool. For many women, it is the tool that's been missing when it comes to understanding why the law of attraction works sometimes, but not all the time. Mm-hmm. Or how, you know, I hear all these people talking about manifesting. What does that mean? I don't know how to work in rhythm with my body or cycles of time. And it's a really powerful tool.
I love this. And I'm so glad that you mentioned the part about knowing the difference between, or not knowing, but at least referring and doing the research around when a moon is in Aries versus when the moon is in Virgo versus whatever, because it's different characteristics. And so something I also started paying attention to many months ago is wherever that sign is, what house is that in my own chart, to notice, okay, so what area of my life might this really be pressing on, or might this really be touching on for me right now? And so again, this is the type of thing where you can go as deep as you want, or you can stay as close to the surface as you want. But there's so many different, like when Jenn was saying earlier, just try it out. There's like many, many, many levels and layers on which you can try this out. So I'm curious now, what does your business look like now? How do you work with people? Do you have courses? Do you still do one-on-one sessions?
Yeah, I do a lot of one-on-one sessions. I do courses. I have a Lunarologic Moon School where I take women through multiple moon cycles in their individual chart to help them awaken these potentials as a healing path, as a business tool, as a conscious manifestation tool. I'm currently working on a book.
Cool.
And I do a lot of writing.
Yeah, and for those of you who are on Instagram, I love following you on Instagram. It's like those daily little doses, like daily little reminders. And I do like what you were saying earlier. You'll post something. There's a couple of astrologers I follow. I follow you. I follow Chani Nicholas. I follow Ezzy Spencer's moon stuff. She's been on the podcast too. And when I see something, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And it's like, Google. And then you jump down the rabbit hole. And again, you want to be disciplined with yourself and not just get like sucked in and like lose a whole entire day to this, which I have done. I say that from experience. I'm projecting my experience up to everyone else. I've done it, like busting out the notebook, like drawing my own chart, like learning the signs. But there's something about the connection to yourself and to the earth and to the cosmos. And I don't know if this is just, so do you have male clients or mostly women?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I do have male clients, especially now more than ever. Uh, Especially men who are awakening, if you will, or men who have interesting relationships with their own gender, or men who are, you just know how intelligent astrology can be from a business perspective. One of my first real clients was a hedge fund owner, and he actually had me working in his hedge fund for enough for it to be my whole business when I first started out. And we did a lot with astrology, in terms of trading, in terms of personal development. But I mean, the primary base of, I prefer to work with women. That's my calling. So that's who I market to, and that's who I primarily work with. But yeah, lots of men have been through my doors. And right now I was just on Nico Tortatello's podcast, he's an actor in the Youngers. And so through his work, a lot of men have been coming to me as well. So it's interesting.
Yeah. So the reason I asked is because I was curious, do you find I'm sure astrology is effective. The efficacy is probably based on the receptivity and openness of the person. Yeah. Or no?
Not
So,
really. Yeah. I
so
mean, I
what is
find
it?
it's efficacious whether someone's receptive to it or not. And even in the moment, if they're not really receptive to it, typically they cycle back to it at some point, and they're like, oh, I really actually wasn't ready to hear that, but thank you.
So the facts, like what you're getting is what you're getting. It's just a matter of what you do with it. Would that be more accurate?
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I'm just curious. For some reason, I feel like it must like work better for women. That's not a good articulation, and I'm sure it's not accurate, but when I say that, what comes up for you based on your work with actual people, not my hypotheses?
No, it actually, I don't think that it works better with women. I think that it works regardless of your gender. I think
Yeah.
women have a hunger and a thirst to understand things more. I think women are willing to look at their shadows
Yeah.
way more than men, and therefore they explore it more. They are, um, women are the number one buyers of books. They're ruling household incomes now, and they're making decisions based on what they need. So women need personal development tools and are hungry for them, but that doesn't mean it's any less efficacious for men or any less desirable for men. Um, but men are not as complicated as women in a lot of ways. Like, they can be really work, sports, workout, sex, food, bed. That's a stereotype for sure. And they don't have the hormonal rhythms. They don't have the intense friendships and bonding rituals that women do. When they're not, falling in love easily, they might not be as obsessed with why, so they might not be as driven to alternative methods as women are. But that said, there have been many smart men that consult astrologers. You'd be surprised how much they lean on it, to even understand the women in their life. I mean, I've counseled men over decisions onto whether or not they get engaged, don't get engaged, stay together, break up, how to run businesses, have babies. They have a lot of the same questions we do.
This is really cool to hear because some of these like shoddy questions I was just asking, I'm so glad you had good answers for them because they weren't even fully formed. But I was like, I know these things aren't concrete, but based on just the men in my own life and people's own responses,
Mm-hmm.
I find the men to be more skeptical. But it's cool to hear for people who aren't that what they do with it, and they have similar questions. I think there's probably women listening who are equally as, I'm not like super surprised by it, but I bet some of our listeners are actually kind of shocked to hear that.
Yeah. I mean, and it's actually quite cool. I'm even running a free challenge right now, and I have to catch myself because I keep addressing women, but I'm like, there's actually a lot of men in this right now.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I love to hear that because I think one of the things that a lot of women who are into personal development and who are doing their work will say is like, where are the men? And it's like they're everywhere. I think just probably a little more self-conscious sometimes at coming in to stuff like this or talking about it. Because actually I dated someone who was totally into these things. He just wouldn't talk about it. He was like using this stuff to run his
Mm-hmm.
business and do all kinds of things behind the scenes, but like you would never catch him like posting about it
Mm-hmm.
publicly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, part of our work is to call them in, to
Yeah.
call in the conscious men into the conversation and
Yeah.
to approach things from like a perspective of like, hey, this is working for me. It's probably going to work for you. Maybe you even use it. Maybe you're even curious about this. So using calling in practices of like making it easy for them to approach this or have those sorts of conversations. And then the ones who are just like, done, not into it's going to glaze over them anyway. And the same is true with women,
Yeah.
for women who are just like,
That works
I
for
don't
all
need to know
people.
my sun, moon, and rising.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's cool. Thank you for exploring that with me. I'm always interested in those different dynamics. So what are you doing right now to untame yourself? Untame yourself just meaning coming home to your truest nature.
Yeah. Um, very recently I left New York City and I'm living in a town of, 800 people where there's really not much other than organic family farms and summer camps. So that's very wild in and of itself, to spend so much time in nature and outdoors and away from the city. I would say that's probably the biggest thing I've done, is just remove myself from a lot of high cost, high volume living and fast paced stuff. But I think I'm always exploring the shadows of my mind and the shadows of my heart, particularly in my business, particularly in the wake of so much political turmoil in this country, really trying to understand how I can be better, stronger, more vocal, where I'm embodying some behaviors that I think were ridiculous. Where are they showing up inside of me? How have I contributed to that? What lens am I bringing to it? And how can I address that without forgetting that I'm part of the problem?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So where can people find you, and where do you want people to come follow you on the social medias? Where's the best place?
Yeah. So, the best place to find me is at jenniferracioppi.com. It's just Jennifer, Jennifer, last name Racioppi.com. And then at Jenn, JENN, on Instagram. And I have a business page on Facebook. Those are my two main spots.
Cool.
Pretty,
And we'll
pretty
put
focused in my social media. I'm not on everything.
Yeah, we'll put links to all of those things on the show notes page as well. So thank you so much. Thank you for schooling us. Thank you for answering my weird questions. I feel like I had weird questions for this one because it's something I geek out on so much, but I know our listeners, there's like a range of interest and understanding. So hopefully for those of you listening, you all got like some kind of nugget, regardless of your current relationship to an understanding of astrology. And I always just love hearing other people's stories and how they apply things like this in their own personal context and in the work that they do with people. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. And we'll see you later.
Thank you for having me.
People are going to trigger you. Experiences are going to trigger you. They're going to be somebody that you don't like because they reminded you of your brother, your uncle, your first grade teacher, whatever. And you're going to project your stuff onto them. All of that's fine as long as you're taking responsibility for it and not making it about them.